We are officially less than 24 hours out from fantasy football kicking off in week 2. I can't tell you how happy this makes me. This time of the year is just the best time of the year, man. It's part of one of my most requested video ideas, which is to provide you these must start and sit guys on every single matchup. So we did the running backs earlier today. Now we're going through every matchup once again to see who the must start and sit wide receivers are in week 2 fantasy football. And the bonus at the end for those who stick around is going to be my favorite underdog flex option of the week. So make sure you watch it to the end, and I will be up all day and all night answering your week 2 fantasy football matchup questions. So if you have questions this week, make sure to drop in the comments, and please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already to show support for the channel. But let's go ahead and just get into all these matchups, shall we? So the first matchup being the Ravens at the Bengals this week, taking on the Bengals in Cincinnati. You obviously start Jamar Chase. He's a no-brainer. I know he had the bad week last week. You drafted him just too high to sit this guy. He's going to be fine. He had 9 total targets last week. It wasn't like they just ignored the guy. It was just a bad day for the Bengals offense. Same thing goes for T. Higgins. He's on the lower end, obviously, of starting options, but he still had 8 targets on Sunday versus the Cleveland Browns. Again, he was not ignored either. This offense did not ignore their 2 best offensive weapons. It was just simply a bad day. This Bengals team always consistently starts slow. That's what Joe Burrow has done for the past several years in the NFL, because he comes into the league and into the season always dealing with something. 2021, it was recovering from the ACL. 2022, appendicitis knocked him out. 2023, obviously, he had the calf injury that sidelined him. They're going to be fine. Their wide receivers are going to be fine. Joe Mixon's going to be fine. Burrow's going to be fine. I'm starting both of these guys this week. Flex territory, we've got a couple names here. We've got Zay Flowers, obviously, as a higher-end flex option for me. I took a public L on Zay Flowers in my live stream after the Monday night game, and I said, look, I was wrong about Zay Flowers. This guy is the wide receiver 1 in this Baltimore offense, and it's really not particularly close. Zay Flowers dominated the team with a 48% target share on Sunday against the Houston Texans. Mark Andrews comes back, it's definitely going to be different, but it's not going to shake it up enough for me to deter being away from starting Zay Flowers, because he is very important to this offense, and it was demonstrated in week 1. Rashad Bateman, he's a lower-end flex guy along with Tyler Boyd. They're both lower-end flex options for me. I think that both of them have the capability of hitting a big play or two and maybe getting like 6 or 7 targets. But again, they're very inconsistent guys. Sit Odell Beckham Jr. Didn't see enough from him. I'm not going to tell my audience to start Odell Beckham Jr. And most people don't even ask me about Odell Beckham Jr. So I think most of you guys understand that you're not starting Odell Beckham Jr. Seahawks at Lions is the next matchup here in Detroit. So obviously you start Amon-Ra St. Brown. Dude was excellent last week in Kansas City. He had a great game. Touchdown, capped off his week. You never sit Amon-Ra St. Brown. This matchup is also very good as well. Seahawks just got lit up by a way worse team in the Los Angeles Rams. I'm starting Amon-Ra with full confidence every week, but especially this week. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they're in start territory as well. Tyler Lockett was closer to flex territory. I still do think that the Seahawks will rebound this week, and those guys will have more opportunities this week. DK Metcalf, same boat. His week was saved last week by a touchdown. I'm still going to keep starting DK Metcalf. Flex territory, I can consider Jackson Smith-Njigba this week. I think, like I said earlier, all throughout the offseason, I believe that Jackson Smith-Njigba will get more and more important and more involved in this offense as time goes on. It's just going to take some time, but he had 5 targets last week. That's nothing to scoff at all. It was just a bad game, so he didn't have a great fantasy output. Jackson Smith-Njigba is on the rise for sure. Josh Reynolds, I said he was a good waiver wire pickup this week. He was one of the top guys in my waiver wire ad video this week. I think that Josh Reynolds is a just fine ad personally, because this guy is in an offense where they pass the ball quite a bit, and he's the wide receiver 2 right now without Jameson Williams. I think you can start him. He's in the lower tier for sure, but I'm not deterred from starting him. And then everybody else you'll sit. Nobody else you need to worry about in this matchup. Colts at Texans, taking on the Houston Texans in Houston this week. You start Michael Pittman Jr. He's the only guy I can tell you to confidently start. And I know a lot of people have questions about Pittman. I'm putting him in my lineup. I think this guy is going to be very good for the remainder of fantasy football in 2023. This offense is so much better based on last week than they were at all last year at any point. Michael Pittman Jr., very good last week in fantasy as well. I think it continues on this week into Houston. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, all the Houston Texans wide receivers, they're all flexible. I wouldn't prefer to start any of them though. The guy that is in the higher end flex territory is Nico Collins. He made my top 30 list of my wide receivers this week. I think Nico Collins can be started. I wouldn't say it's ideal. Tank Dell, Robert Woods, they're both kind of in the lower end of flex territory for me. I just don't think that either of those guys are going to be the wide receiver one. And this offense just simply doesn't really have enough quality pass catching opportunities for these other wide receivers. Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, you sit them both. Josh Downs had a better week than I thought. I'm not ready to start him yet. Alec Pierce, also a guy I was not impressed with last week. Didn't really get many opportunities. Bears at Buccaneers, our next matchup here. I'm going to start Mike Evans and DJ Moore. They're both basically in the same tier for me. They're both borderline flex guys, but I do feel confident to start them both because obviously Mike Evans had a good week, and I do believe that this matchup is basically just as good. Last week it was Minnesota, this week against the Bears secondary. I think he's got just as good of a matchup as he had last week. DJ Moore, I believe, and here's what I believe personally, I think that the Chicago Bears are going to look back at that game tape last week and realize that we did not target a guy that we traded a lot for in the offseason enough in that Sunday game versus the Packers. He only got 2 targets. I think that jumps up to like 6 or 7 targets this week. DJ Moore is going to be more involved this week. I got plenty of confidence in DJ Moore. Flex territory, Chris Godwin, Darnell Mooney, they're both kind of in the middle to lower tier for me. Chris Godwin, I've said it all off season, and I've said it during the season as well. I don't like the fit with Baker Mayfield. It's not a good fit. Baker is not an accurate guy. Chris Godwin is a guy who tends to do a lot of shorter routes. So there's a lot of things that I just don't love about Chris Godwin. I do acknowledge that he's the wide receiver 2, and he's a very good wide receiver 2, but I don't love starting him on a week-to-week basis. Darnell Mooney, same type of deal. I think the player is good. I just don't know if the fit is great. And with the Chicago Bears specifically, there just isn't enough passing volume to go around in this offense. Sit everybody else. Nobody else you need to worry about. Chiefs at Jaguars, the fantasy football matchup of the week here. I love this matchup. I cannot wait to watch it. But ironically, there's only one guy that I consider a must start, and it's Calvin Ridley. Also, publicly took an L on Calvin Ridley as well. A huge L I took on Calvin Ridley. This guy looked so good. He looked great. He was clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense. He was clearly the most important piece to the offense. This guy is tremendous, and in a high-flying matchup like this, I love the potential here. Of course, you start Calvin Ridley. We've got a massive amount of guys in flex territory. Christian Kirk absolutely can be flexed. He's at the top here because, like I said earlier this week, I don't think that we can count Christian Kirk out. The contract that he signed with the Jaguars is simply too big, and he got like $72 million deal, and over half of that money is guaranteed. So they're not going to just sit this guy on the bench. Bad week for him for sure. Definitely expected more, but I'm not out on Christian Kirk just yet. Zay Jones, just for the big playability. Very much a boomer bust Gabe Davis type of guy, but I'm definitely in on starting a guy like that in this type of matchup. Rashee Rice, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, Justin Watson, all relatively in the same range. Rashee Rice is my preferred guy here. He looked the best out of all of them, followed by Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Toney, I'm literally just out on in fantasy football at this point. I don't think he's a good option at all. And then also Justin Watson, just not consistent enough for me to see really plugging him into my flex lineup. And then Sky Moore, Justin Ross, you go ahead and sit them. Sky Moore looked really bad last week. Justin Ross didn't get enough opportunities. Packers at Falcons this week. We're going to go ahead and say this is a tough one, obviously. I'm filming this on Saturday morning. We don't have news enough yet about Christian Watson and his status on if he's going to go. I saw that he missed basically the whole week of practice again, so he's probably not going to play. If he does play, I would start him for sure. I think the matchup is not terrible, but it's not great either. So I think that Christian Watson would be a fine start if he plays. And then Romeo Doubs in start territory if Christian Watson does not go. If Christian Watson does not go, you can start Romeo Doubs with complete confidence this week. I got no problem starting Romeo Doubs. Now, the problem is, if Christian Watson does play, Romeo Doubs moves to flex territory rather than being in starting territory for sure. So we'll have to monitor that injury situation. By the time you're watching this, there may be more clarity on Christian Watson's situation. So we'll just have to monitor what happens with this Green Bay wide receiver room. Drake London, Jaden Reed, they're both in flex territory for me. Drake London, these are both lower tier guys, honestly. Drake London was one of my biggest concerns coming away from week 1. The problem is not the player. That's not the problem. The problem is the volume, and they don't throw the ball enough at all. So I have an issue with Drake London. Jaden Reed on here because if Christian Watson doesn't go, he's in flex territory, and then you go ahead, you sit everybody else in this matchup. Then we've got the Raiders taking on the Bills in Buffalo this week. And man, we've got 2 stud wide receivers. Stephon Diggs, Davante Adams, you start both of them. They're both playing. They're both going to be good. I think it's a good matchup for both of these guys. Stephon Diggs was great last week against a much better defense. I think that this week he's going to go off against the Raiders. This team's pissed off. They want to go in here and kick some butt against the Raiders. Davante Adams, not a great week last week. That's going to happen sometimes. Jimmy Garoppolo is simply just not the quarterback that Derek Carr was. And that's, kind of weird to say, right? But when it comes to Davante Adams' strengths, he's not as well equipped to suit and cater to those strengths as Derek Carr was. But you still never sit Davante Adams. His upside is too high and his target share is too high. Gabe Davis, Hunter Renfrow, definitely in flex territory for me. No Jacoby Myers makes Hunter Renfrow an interesting option in full PPR leagues. Just keep that in mind, but also remember, he's probably in the lower to middle tier of flex options here that I would pick a lot of guys over him. Gabe Davis, absolutely in contention here. Matchup guy, always a bigger boom or bust guy. I'm fine with taking a shot on Gabe Davis basically every single week if you don't have a more suitable and more comfortable option. And then you sit Deontay Hardy. He's just not relevant enough yet in this offense for me to really care much about him. And you sit everybody else as well. Chargers at Titans here. You start the 2 wide receiver ones in this offense. In either one, you got Keenan Allen, you got DeAndre Hopkins. Both of them are target guys. Neither of them are big play guys, but they're both going to see 10 to 12 targets in this game, possibly 15 targets in this game. Chargers defense, they're not very good. Titans defense weakness, they can't defend the pass. So I'm good with starting both these guys easily. Mike Williams coming off a bad week. Harder to put this guy in your lineup after that type of week, but I think he's still definitely worth it, at least considering starting him, because he definitely does have the big boom or bust type of ability, and I do think he will be more involved this week against a defense that is not good defending the pass. Treylon Burks, very low-end type of flex guy right here. I think he definitely will get more involved as the season continues on, and I do think that he is going to be a big play threat when he does start to get going here. DeAndre Hopkins is going to open a lot of things up. You sit Quentin Johnson, you sit Josh Palmer. Quentin Johnson, I get the excitement. I'm not big on the guy personally, but there just isn't enough there as of yet. 49ers at Rams this week in Los Angeles. You start the 2 San Francisco wide receivers. Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, they're both easy plays right here. Brandon Ayuk, obviously, coming off the much better week between the two. And Deebo Samuel's week wasn't bad, but we're talking about a stud wide receiver last week. I think he was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy last week. So Brandon Ayuk, I continue to start him with confidence. Deebo Samuel, I still do as well. I think the matchup here is not as bad as people think. So I'm good with starting both 49ers options. Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, they're both in flex territory for me. I know that Puka Nacua was the big waiver wire pickup. I understand people are going to be ready to throw him out there right away. If you do, that's fine. I don't think he's a bad option. This defense, though, remember, guys, this is going to be a much tougher test for them than the Seattle Seahawks were just 1 week ago. It's going to be a much different story here. Puka Nacua also dealing with an injury as well. I think he's going to play, but this is not a good situation from a matchup perspective for either one of those guys. Van Jefferson, you go ahead and sit. This guy had the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1. He got overtaken by 2 players younger than him. It's over for Van Jefferson fantasy football. Giants at Cardinals. Nobody is a must start in this category. Neither team has a wide receiver 1 that I want to start. None of them are in consideration, and really there's only one guy I'd consider flexing, and it's Marquise Hollywood Brown. Marquise Hollywood Brown is the best receiver on the field on Sunday in this particular matchup, but even then, last week, he had like 5 catches for like 28 yards. That's because the ceiling in this offense isn't as high. They've got Josh Dobbs, a career backup quarterback, as their starting quarterback. It's not a good situation here. I would never tell you guys to start Marquise Brown with full confidence. This is a flex type of option right here. And then I'm not putting anyone else on there. Jalen Hyatt, all the other Giants receivers, we didn't see enough from any of them on Sunday versus the Dallas Cowboys. So it's hard for me to tell you guys one of them is going to be the guy when it was such a bad blowout. It's always hard to tell what the volume of each player is going to be in that big of a blowout game. So we're going to play it safe, not start any of these guys. Jets and Cowboys, one of the best matchups of the week here. You start CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is a clear start for me. And you might be wondering, why is Garrett Wilson not on this list right here? I'll tell you why. Garrett Wilson obviously is missing Aaron Rodgers. That's huge. And I get it. Garrett Wilson's a great player. I was so high on Garrett Wilson coming into the season. It's very unfortunate what happened with Aaron Rodgers, though, because Zach Wilson is not going to be able to get Garrett Wilson 12 targets and 10 catches for 150 plus and 2 touchdowns. That's not going to be in Garrett Wilson's cards anymore, unfortunately, this year. So he drops down to flex territory, and it's a bummer that it has to be like that. I do think he's in the upper tier flex category, but nothing is set in stone with Garrett Wilson anymore. Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup. Brandon Cooks is dealing with an injury. He may not go. Michael Gallup becomes flex worthy if Brandon Cooks doesn't go. I'm not wild about either of these guys, though. And then you go ahead, you sit everybody else. Commanders at Broncos here in Denver this week. Again, I don't have anybody as a March start guy. I don't love any of the receivers here personally. I like Jerry Jeudy a lot. And that's why he's on this list of flex guys, because Jerry Jeudy is making his 2023 debut in week 2 versus the Commanders. That is going to help this offense a lot, and it will probably open things up for guys like Courtland Sutton and Marvin Mims, but I've got both those guys on the bench here. I just don't think that there's going to be enough there with the return of Jerry Jeudy. Now, you got your Jahan Dotson, you got Terry McLaurin on this list as well. None of these guys are low-tier flex options. None of them are just in must-start category as well. Jahan Dotson absolutely would start him. He had plenty of work last week. He's going to be fine in this offense. And Terry McLaurin always is going to be a big boom play. Just keep in mind, this offense is very anemic as it is. So starting 2 wide receivers on this same team, it gets a little dicey for sure. Dolphins and Patriots, the Sunday night game. I've got to start, of course, the 2 wide receivers in Miami. Both freaking world beaters, man. Tyreek Hill, obviously, you don't sit him. I understand that. Listen, I talked about it earlier this week. Bill Belichick is well known for taking your number 1 option out of the game. He is well known for doing that. I don't know if anyone could stop Tyreek Hill. Honestly, I really, really don't. I'm starting Tyreek Hill every week without a question. It doesn't ever matter. You put Tyreek Hill in your lineup. Jalen Waddle, same thing. You put him in your lineup because this dude, although he had a down week last week, he's still a top tier fantasy wide receiver option. Electric offense. Electric wide receiver 1, helping take coverage away from Waddle. Waddle's going to be fine. He's going to have his share of big games as well. Flex territory, Kendrick Bourne is in here because he was the clear target favorite last week. And I do think that the Patriots are going to be in a very similar game script situation to what they were last week, where they're going to probably have to throw the ball quite a bit to keep up in this game. Not wild about Kendrick Bourne, not wild about any Patriots options right here, aside from Ramondre Stevenson at the running back position, but he's worth a shot at flex if you are really, really desperate or in a deeper league. Juju Smith-Schuster, Braxton Berrios, you go ahead and sit him. Everybody else as well. Not enough there for any of those guys for me to really consider, and there just isn't enough efficiency either. Now, in the first Monday night matchup here, we've got the Saints taking on the Panthers in Carolina this week, and obviously you start Chris Olave. Chris Olave was great last week. Did not disappoint last week in fantasy. Dude's just going to continue to build off of that. Another easy matchup here against the Panthers. I love Chris Olave. You never sit Chris Olave. Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, they're both in flex consideration, but they are very lower tier guys. Michael Thomas had a couple good drives in that game. Became very irrelevant later on in the game. Rashid Shaheed, I could see people taking a shot on him if they want the big play. But again, they're in lower flex territory for me. Not wild about starting either of these guys. And then you sit all the Panthers wide receivers. I don't care which one you have. Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, Terrace Marshall. I don't care which one you have. Don't start a Carolina Panthers wide receiver. We don't know enough information about who the number 1 target's going to be, and if any of them are even good enough to be able to be in your fantasy lineup. Browns at Steelers, last Monday night game on this schedule right here. You start Amari Cooper. I understand bad week last week, and when you're talking about home Amari Cooper, it was a huge disappointment for sure. I'm not going to sit Amari Cooper in this matchup. This team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, got ripped to shreds by the 49ers in week 1. Offensively, defensively, running, passing, they were ripped to shreds. Amari Cooper is going to be just fine in week 1. You go ahead and play Amari Cooper confidently as a borderline low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Flex territory, definitely George Pickens is there now for sure. Just because Deontay Johnson is gone. Deontay Johnson will not play. George Pickens should be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I like George Pickens a lot. I told a lot of you guys, draft him over the offseason. I have issues with the offense, though. This offense is not nearly as improved as I thought they would be. They look basically the same as last year. So, George Pickens is not a must-start, but he definitely is a flex option. Elijah Moore, lower-tier flex guy for me. I know he had the volume last week. I need to see a little bit more before I confidently say, start this guy without any questions. He's still in flex territory, just would not be comfortable starting him over a lot of different guys. And then you're going to go ahead and sit Calvin Austin, Allen Robinson on the Pittsburgh Steelers if you've got either of those guys. Neither of those guys are just going to be in a high enough upside offense for me to really consider in fantasy football. And then for my favorite underdog flex option of the week, out of all these guys, my favorite is actually going to be Kendrick Bourne of the New England Patriots. Kendrick Bourne obviously was the wide receiver 1 in this offense last week. It's not a super efficient passing offense. There's no question about that. Mac Jones also threw more than 50 freaking passes in week 1. Is that going to keep up? Not likely throughout the season. But I'll tell you what, in this type of matchup, it's actually possible it happens again. They're going to be playing catch up with the Miami Dolphins offense in this game. Now, it is a divisional matchup in New England, so they do have the upper hand from a home field advantage perspective and the fact that it will be a scrummy Sunday night game. But I do think that out of all the weapons on this offense, Kendrick Bourne looked the best last week. And this secondary against Miami is going to be a matchup that I think he could take advantage of if they game script right and they actually bring out some plays that can highlight Kendrick Bourne. He's my favorite underdog, lower tier flex option of the week. So let me know what matchup questions you have leading up to week 2 fantasy football, and I will be in the comments all day answering y'all's questions. And if you want to see the top must start or sit running backs for week 2 fantasy football, click on this video right here.